Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. Before we start tonight's show, I just want to take a moment to pause to think of all of the artists and entertainers and performers that are out of work due to the pandemic. Broadway shut down 231 days ago today, and everyone's been out of work, and that includes the ticket takers and the ushers and the restaurants around the theaters. Everyone. And so I want you to take a moment to think of all of those. I hope you all have a safe Halloween this year. And we're on the eve of a major election. I don't want to get political. No matter what side you're on, vote. It's very, very important that we all do so. Now, I am very excited about my guest tonight. And I want to begin, William Deresiewicz. Did I pronounce it right? Good. And he's written this incredible book. And when I first read about this and I reached out to him, The Death of the Artist, and it's how creators are struggling to survive in the age of billionaires and big tech. I reached out to him and I said that I would love to have him on the show. There's so many layers to this book. My hope tonight is that not only will you be enticed to go out and get the book, but you will also get the previous books that Bill has written. Bill, thank you for being here, first of all.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Thank you. And I want to begin, before we jump in and talk about the book, I want to find out how you're doing really in the midst of this crazy time that we find ourselves in.
Well, I'm experiencing emotional overload, like I think a lot of people are. I've been fortunate that the disease has spared my family and my friends. It was hard to put out a book in the pandemic, to be honest. It kind of got buried by the really major things that were going on. And that's been true of anyone who's put out a book, or we're going to talk about this, about people in the arts, people in entertainment. It's been a hard time.
Well, I want to go back. I want to talk about the process. I know that, writing a book is a solitary endeavor to begin with. And obviously, when you sat down to write this book, you had no idea what was ahead for all of us.
That's right.
I want to ask, when, where, and how did the spark come to you that you wanted to write this book and that you felt that it was important to share this story? Or these stories, I should say, because there are many interviews.
Right. It was a gradual process, but I think fundamentally it was rooted in the fact that I'd been hearing for so long, as a lot of people have, that this is supposedly the best time ever to be an artist. I mean, this is the line that comes out of the tech industry, because you can circumvent the gatekeepers, you can just put your stuff out there. But also hearing from artists, starting with musicians after Napster in 1999, that actually this is a terrible time to be an artist because it's going to be really hard to get anybody to pay you for your stuff. And because I've always cared really deeply about the arts and have friends who are artists of various kinds, I really wanted to find out what was actually going on. It wasn't even so much that I wanted to find out which story was true, because it was obvious to me that the artists were telling the truth. But like the first word of the subtitle of the book says, how actually are artists managing to do it, given the difficulties of doing it in the age of the internet?
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to go back before we get to the book again. You started out as a critic, am I correct?
I'm still a critic.
Okay.
I was I know that can be a dirty word in the arts.
Well, I was going to say it's unusual that a critic would write a book about artists and the plight that we're dealing with. And but I mean, to go back to that, and then I've got a question that I want to ask you on that topic.
Right. I mean, I was a dance critic when I lived in New York in the 90s, reviewing modern dance and ballet when I was in graduate school studying English Lit. And then I became an English professor, and I had to leave New York, and I started writing book reviews, which I still do. I left academia 12 years ago. I still write book reviews. Like I said, I care deeply about the arts. I mean, criticism has the connotations of negativity, but it doesn't really mean a negative piece. It means a piece that really tries to grapple with what an artist is doing. And many of my reviews are very positive. I like to write positive reviews. I like to celebrate, to borrow a word from you, the writers that mean so much to me. And like I said, that's emotionally what led me to write this book.
Well, let's start with the word artist.
Yeah.
Bette Midler, for example, said that she never calls herself an artist, that's in the eyes of everyone else who sees her. And I will be very honest with you. I've called many of the people that have sat in the same seat that you're sitting in right now in various places around the world. But they, that I've called them artists. And but to you, what makes a great artist? You talk about this in the book, but so that everyone can hear from your point of view.
Well, just to back up for a second, I actually think it's characteristic of artists that they very reluctantly adopt the descriptor artists for themselves. To me, that's one of the differences that marks the real artist from the poser or pretender or the person who Silicon Valley has sort of encouraged to just put your stuff out there. I'm an artist. I mean, for real artists who are serious about it, who devote their lives to it, it's a word that at the very least needs to be earned, needs to be conquered. I would also say that you don't have to be a great artist to be an artist, and that's important. I didn't confine myself to artists whose art I personally like. Some of the young people, they're mostly young artists. They're not famous people.
Most of the people that you interviewed in the book are from the ages of 24 to 48 in that age group.
Yes, I would say under 40. I wanted to talk to people who are really making their way now in this economy. I did talk to some older people who could tell me about what it was like before, but I wanted to talk to people who were making their way. And like I said, not famous people. If I'd heard about somebody, even from an article in the newspaper, not a superstar, they were already too famous for me to talk to, because I wanted to talk to the sort of that people in the middle, people who are really trying to make it. And I didn't discriminate based on whether I thought their art was good or not, because we're all going to have different tastes.
Well, no, keep going.
And so I didn't filter, by what I thought by my taste. I think there should be art that appeals to all kinds of different people, and that's what makes for a healthy culture, I think.
So going back to a question that I asked you earlier, when you, what was that moment for you, defining moment? Was it just based on conversations that you had with other artists that you wanted to put all of this in a book?
Yeah, I mean, to dig deeper, I had first been thinking a lot about how the word creativity has been appropriated also by Silicon Valley and business. Now everybody's creative. People who write computer code are creative, and everybody, like if you tell somebody that they're not creative, they take it as a personal insult. Or if you tell somebody they're not an artist, they take it as a personal insult. And this phrase creative entrepreneur that I've been hearing a lot about, we're all creative entrepreneurs now. I was really suspicious of that phrase. And I thought I was going to write a more abstract book about creativity, kind of cultural criticism. That might have been a good book to write, but I wanted in the end to really ground this very deeply in the actual experience of individual artists and how they're making a living. I wanted it to be more journalism and interviews than just kind of staring at my navel and writing cultural criticism.
Well, I will say this, I think you succeeded. Reading this book for me changed the way that I look at a lot of things. I've been in New York for 41 years. I came to New York to be an actor. And God willing, when this is all behind us, I will get back to that. But, and my career has taken many different turns, as I'm sure writing the book did for you. I'm sure that the book probably didn't out. It probably took you down a different path than what you originally thought that you were going to write. And that's through the nature of life. It's very interesting from my own point of view. I have never, believe it or not, thought about Silicon Valley until reading this book. And
You're lucky.
no, I actually haven't. I've just been out there doing my own thing, doing my own creativity. But one thing that's very interesting, and I think the timing on this is phenomenal, because since no one is on the boards, so to speak, right now, everyone is live streaming. Everyone's putting content through their computers. As I've said to so many people, all of us who are doing what I'm doing right now have a greater appreciation for the lighting designers and the sound technicians than we've probably ever had in our lives. But what was your first interview in the book? And were you off and running after this, or did that open the doors for you in terms of the way that you wanted to proceed with the book?
I'll tell you about the first interview bit, but I want to tell you about an early interview that wasn't the first. The first one, I published a piece 5 years ago that talked about some of this stuff, but more like cultural criticism. It wasn't really grounded in having talked to artists. That was also called The Death of the Artist. It came out in The Atlantic. And a few people wrote to me, a few artists wrote to me, and I started my interviews by talking to them because I knew they would be willing to talk to me. So it was actually a painter in his 50s who lives in Boulder who talked to me about coming back from he was overseas for a bunch of years, and he came back and he thought he would get a job at a university, and he found out that those jobs are drying up. And he talked more about, what it's like to be a painter in today's world. But a few interviews later, I reached out to an old student I had lost touch with, who had become an independent film director. I quote him, and I give him a pseudonym in the book because it was a very frank interview. I call him Mitchell Johnson. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, that article you wrote a couple years ago, you're still buying into all that stuff about how artists need to be pure and not think about money. And if you think about money, you're a sellout, which was true. It was true. And I was thinking, all these kids these days who are so commercial in their art, they're self-promoting all the time. What's wrong with them? And this guy who was still in his 30s, he really turned me around. And I really took that in. And it was going to be a book that sort of partly criticized, like, what artists? No, I realized, of course, artists are doing that now. They have to do that now. Young ones, especially, who are trying to get their foot in the door. They have to be commercial and think about the market and do things that may seem kind of hacky or cheesy sometimes to get attention, or gimmicky is maybe the best word, but it's totally understandable and it's totally okay, I would say.
Well, you say in the very first line of the book, in the introduction, that this is the relationship between money and art. And it's very interesting because I'm seeing some of my friends that are joining me right now. If you know the New York City cabaret scene, for example, no one's making money in this field. Everyone does it because they love the art form, just the sheer excitement of being on stage. Some of them do pursue it as a career. Many of them, it's also a hobby for them. They have a 9-to-5 job. They don't expect that they're going to make money at this. But one of the issues that I started really thinking about, again, reading the book, is putting a price tag on the work that we do and that we put out there. Can you elaborate about that for a few moments?
Sure. And let me say that, I think all serious artists do it from love, and God bless those who are not trying to make a living, but are still serious. You don't have to be making money to be a very serious artist. But artists, many, maybe I should say most serious artists are trying to at least make some money from their work. And there's this attitude that you should just do it for love. Why are you even asking for money? I mean, again, Silicon Valley and really sort of academics and journalists connected with them like to push this line. It's ridiculous. I mean, lots of people do things for love and we don't expect them to do it for free. So one of my big goals in the book was to try to smash that taboo about around talking about money in relationship to art. And that's why the first line of the book is, this is a book about art and money and the relationship between the two.
And you had me there.
Yeah. Oh, good. And look, I mean, I talked to lots of people, I did a lot of these interviews. And first of all, I mean, I was asking people really intimate questions about their financial lives, which in some ways is harder to ask about or talk about than your sex life. It's something we talk about less. And many of them
There's
told
a
me that
joke in there somewhere.
quite a few of them told me that they were willing to talk to me, somebody they didn't know, and tell me these things because they wanted to help young artists avoid the mistakes that had happened to them because no one had talked to them about money, no one had told them the realities of money in the art. So it's not just a psychological issue, it has practical ramifications. If you don't think about art and you think that you shouldn't ask for money for your art, you're talking about putting a price on your work, or aren't willing to negotiate for a fair price, you're just letting yourself be taken advantage of by the people around the arts. I mean, many of them are great people. Some of them are not such great people, and they're willing to exploit you.
Well, I will say this. I have, in the 41 years that I've been in New York, I've dealt with agents, managers, producers, and everything who have exploited and taken advantage of those situations. And it's always amazing to me that as artists, how many times we are asked to do what we do for absolutely no money. And the issue and there's also this fear factor that goes with a lot of artists, that if you say no, that you won't be asked a second time. That's number one. Or that there's always someone waiting in the wings, waiting to do it for no money. And I think that that's really hurt us in the industry in terms of trying to move forward with making a living at this. One of the interviews that you mentioned in the book was the independent hip hop artist who would have her display at the end of her shows, and people would walk up and actually ask her if they could have a free CD or anything, and just, and that happened.
Can I just have this? Yes.
Can I just have it? And
I just have it.
I'm telling all my friends now, the next time you go out to dinner, just tell them the check will be in the mail. And
that's good. I like that.
That we'll get.
I like that a lot.
Beyond the money aspect, of course, which is the underlying theme with everyone, what is the one common denominator that you found that surprised you the most writing this book?
It's a whole cluster of things. I mean, I came into the book with tremendous admiration for artists, for their talent, and tremendous gratitude for what they've given us, what they give me. I didn't know until I started to talk to people what it takes to be an artist beyond talent and even beyond hard work. Like, I got a picture of what the character of a typical artist is, and I spend a few paragraphs on this in the book because I want people to know there's these ridiculous myths about artists that they're weird and lazy and sort of don't know how to comb their hair. And I mean, these people I talked to were tenacious, single-minded, courageous, incredibly hardworking. They have not only this tremendous capacity to deal with rejection and failure, temporary failure and criticism, but also this enormous flexibility, resilience, resourcefulness. I think there's a spirit of generosity within the arts communities. I come from academia. That was a very big contrast for me. In academia, people, they're always looking at each other over their shoulder. In the arts, it seems like people, obviously there's competition, but it seems like there's real love in that community. Mm-hmm. So,
there is, and there's also right now especially with the pandemic, Donna McKechnie, Broadway dancer, Tony Award winner for Chorus Line, she said, the fact that we're in this business and we spend a lot of our lives between gigs, perhaps we have the upper hand on dealing with this better than those people who do have a 9-to-5 job. But right now, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. We have no idea. I mean, Broadway right now is not even scheduled to come back until June of 2021. And some shows that were scheduled to open this year have now been rescheduled for 2022. What is, what are some of the underlying themes that you find from the artist who are struggling from opportunity to opportunity?
Well, one of them, especially if you're younger, is there's a constant thought, how much longer should I keep doing this? And I write in the book, I have that kind of generic biography of the artist, that chapter I call the life cycle, because I saw these patterns emerging from my interviews. What are artists like when they're kids? What are they like when they're adolescents? One of those sort of way stations on the life cycle is that period in your mid-30s or early 30s or late 30s or whenever it is when you say, how much longer should I keep doing this? And some people go on and some people say, now is the time for plan B. But we can also talk about the pandemic. I mean, I'm sure, many people have been affected, to say the least. But I reached out to all of my interviewees, 140 people in like April, saying, let me know what's going on. And I heard from a lot of them, and I re-interviewed a bunch of them.
Oh, that's. Are you going to do a follow-up?
I'm going to try to do a follow-up article, or more than one article. Absolutely.
Well,
and I've also
posted on that. I'd love to read it.
Yeah, and I've been keeping track of sort of studies that are coming out. The Authors Guild did a survey. Over 60% of authors report a drop in revenue. The most devastating statistic I heard, Americans for the Arts, which is that big advocacy organization in Washington, they put out a study just like 10 days ago. 63% of artists are fully unemployed now.
That's right.
63%. It's incredibly sad and incredibly scary.
Well, another aspect. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just because, like you said, we don't know when this is going to end.
Well, there's another side also, is that I'm very involved with arts and education, and I mentored a school in Weston, Connecticut several years ago, which is a very affluent school. But when they wanted to raise money, when they wanted money for new auditorium seating, they had to do bake sales and magazine drives and anything they could do to raise the money. And yet, when they wanted to put stadium seating for the football field, everyone's throwing money at them. What is it in our culture that you feel that, obviously, the entertainment industry is the biggest industry in New York State. Not just New York City, but all of New York State. Wow. Most of the revenue that comes into New York State comes through the entertainment industry, and especially Broadway. How do we get through this? What are your thoughts? Obviously, you don't have the answer.
No, I don't.
But what are your thoughts on how we get back to this?
Yeah, I think easier said than done, but I think that artists need to organize. And I think that's how I end the book, by talking about how artists have organized. But I've seen, as I've kept my ear to the ground during the pandemic, more and more organizations either starting or ramping up their activities. Like you said earlier, and I just said, artists are incredibly resourceful. They can turn on a dime. And they have this great sense of community. So I think that just like other kinds of workers have unions, and even some kinds of artists have unions, that help get their voice heard in public and in the political sphere. I think that's how it has to happen. It's not going to happen from individuals. It's not going to happen from people writing blog posts, although, do that too. It's going to take everybody holding hands and standing up and saying, we're the biggest industry in New York State, or whatever that is, and get a seat at the table. So many of these artists who are organizing told me, we're trying to get a seat at the table in Washington or wherever that is.
Now, I want to go back to where we somewhat started with this, and I mentioned to you Silicon Valley and the fact that I truly had not even thought about this. And, it's quite interesting in how they have manipulated the entertainment industry to the point that they have. And with, especially right now, with us being in this pandemic, I know that at the beginning of October, there was a lot of fear going through Facebook, for example, that you could be kicked off of Facebook for sharing film clips or music that you did not have the rights to or whatever. Obviously, thank God that's not happening. But why that route in terms of your story and the stories that you're sharing?
Well, look, I mean, this has been the most important factor for any artist who puts their stuff, any artist whose work can be digitized. I mean, in some ways, Broadway, for all of what's happening to it now, is maybe in the best position because it's not only live performance, but it's like the one sector of live performance that actually makes a profit, unlike symphonies, operas, ballets, and so forth. But for most artists, and for most of the ones I talk about in the book, musicians, writers, people who do still or moving images, many kinds of visual artists whose work is digitized, illustrators, graphic designers, cartoonists, they are reaching their audience and earning a living largely online, or they would have if online hadn't completely. So what does online do? What does the internet do? Starting with Napster, it makes all digital content available for free or for so little money that it's not even worth talking about. I don't want to get into an argument about posting film clips and music, because I agree that sometimes, sort of the culture industry, Hollywood, the labels maybe went a little too far in prosecuting people in the early days. But the truth is that on a mass scale, the fact that your work can be posted on YouTube, posted on Facebook, I mean, this is a disaster. This is a disaster. And
well, believe it or not, I'm on the same side that you're on this issue.
Okay.
So there's not going to be an argument on my end.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so the answer is not to like prosecute the grandma who posted a clip of her granddaughter dancing and there's a Prince song in the background and it's violating copyright. The answer is to deal with the platforms themselves. They have so much power, they dictate terms, and unlike even like the labels and studios and publishers who have a bad reputation, sometimes for good reason, they don't even have to invest in artists. Like, they have no stake in the success of any single artist. They're perfectly happy, like one person gets 1 million streams for their song or 1 million people get one each. It's all the same to them. They're not putting any money into it. But they're making tons of money from it. They're making tens of billions of dollars a year. We can just talk about YouTube. Half of music streaming happens on YouTube. YouTube is thought to pay 0.07 of a cent per stream. That means if your music is streamed 1 million times, you get $700. That might be a week's rent in New York City. So what has to happen is that, and it might be starting to happen, we might be starting down that road finally, is that we actually start to deal in Washington with these monopolies.
Now, I've been fortunate enough to interview some major names in this business, and one of the things that I've asked them is the things that they like most about what's changed in the industry and what they don't like about the changes in the industry. And one thing that, and it's a double-edged sword, is the fact that you are responsible now for your own content. There was a time where you have a song that you put out there, and there's a possibility that it will be played on every major radio station in the country, and you'll get airtime. Because the industry has changed so much, people are not getting the kind of exposure that they would have gotten 25, 30 years ago. What do you think are the answers? What are the solutions for getting around all of this?
For getting around the problem of not getting the exposure you used to get? This is, I'm afraid to say that this is a problem that might not have a solution, because one of the things that the internet has done is that it's drawn many, many, many more people into creative production for exactly the reasons we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the days where you had to get a record deal with a label in order to really make music in any kind of legitimate way, yes, the labels, that meant you had to please the gatekeepers, and most people couldn't do it. But if you could get the deal, you had a good shot at getting some level of exposure. Now that you don't have to rely on the labels, you can record your own stuff and put it on Spotify. There are something like 10 million artists on Spotify. 10 million. And I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of those started doing music since, in the last 20 years. That's a reality that every artist has to deal with now. What it means also, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is that you're responsible, as you say, for your own content. You're basically a one-person small business that has to do everything. And it takes a tremendous amount of work and energy and stress to do that marketing part. So the answer to what can you do is what the people in my book, and I imagine many people are doing, which is spending half of their energy as artists, if not a lot more than half, not creating, but promoting, marketing, managing, reaching out, maintaining contacts. That's the reality now.
Now, going back to the artists who are just starting out in this business and trying to get their foot in the door, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that they make just starting out? And how do they put a price tag on their work, their art, and moving forward in this business and establishing themselves?
Right. I talked to some people who are artists themselves, but also have taken their experience and used it to become sort of consultant managers of other artists, like maybe not full-time managers, but they sort of can be retained to do that. And I've asked them these questions. I remember one in particular who works with musicians. She said the biggest mistake is to not have a plan. The biggest mistake is to not have a plan. And half of what she does with the young musicians who she works with is to just get them to figure out a plan. And that plan includes budgeting and includes a realistic assessment of how much money you're going to make and what you need to do now so that 2 or 3 years from now, things are more viable. Another big mistake, and it was a different consultant who said this to me, is just not thinking about the money side at all. Absorbing the myths that you don't have to think about it, and also all these other myths that young artists have. The world's going to discover you. If you just do it long enough, things will work out. You just need to want it badly enough.
Go
ahead. Well, yet another one of these consultants who was a musician for a long time, he said, after about 10 years as a young musician, not getting anywhere, I realized that the problem wasn't the record industry. The problem was me, because I didn't know what I was doing, not as a musician, and he told me he read like 300 books on business and marketing and networking. He gave himself basically a self-guided business degree. And among other things, he realized, I can't just do the stuff that I like. I have to do stuff that other people are going to find valuable, because that's the business that I'm in.
No, I interviewed Carol Lawrence, and she said being in this business is the greatest elixir in the world. The more you get, the more you want. The rub is whether or not the audience wants it.
That's right, and you can't blame the audience. I mean, that's not going to get you anywhere.
Well, an audience, for the most part, knows what they want. Sometimes they need to be spoon-fed. That happens too, with all due respect to all audiences. But also, my friend David Friedman, a songwriter, says, we're all in this together. We're just not in the same boat. And I look at where I am in my career, and I look at you also, Bill, and, writing a book. This is art. You may not have thought of it in those terms, but you sit down with, I'm sure, a game plan with where you want this to go. You've got a process in terms of getting it out there. And then you're thrown a curveball like the pandemic coming your way. What have you had to do in terms of reinventing yourself to get your book out there and to get it down the same paths that you would have done if there was no pandemic?
Right. I should say my reinvention may just be starting in a major way. I've been very lucky to, first of all, I was 44 before I became a full-time freelancer, so I had a salary. It's really something to go from having a salary to not having a salary. I mean, being self-employed, and you know, I have some pages on being self-employed in the book because
Yes.
I want people who aren't to understand what it means. I was lucky to have, publishing deals with major publishers. I've been really lucky that way. But now this is my third book since 2011 with a major publisher, and each time I'm doing more and more. That's to the extent that I've reinvented myself, right? That whole idea that you just put a book out and maybe they send you on a book tour and it's so glamorous. That's not how it works. With this book, especially because I didn't get the exposure I was counting on, reviews and in newspapers and radio spots, say on NPR, I've done a million podcasts, like 15, 16 and counting. I have more scheduled. I've beaten the bushes. Just today, I wrote to another 10 schools, colleges where I have contacts saying, hey, do you want me to give a virtual talk? That was in addition to the 35 that I had already written to. So it's really, I mean, it's a full-time job just to try to generate opportunities, knowing that most of the emails you send out are not going to be successful.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think the operative word right there is proactive, being as proactive in your career as you possibly can. I think that what has happened, especially in recent years in the arts, are shows such as these competitive shows, like American Idol and everything, where people feel that they're going to become instant stars. And that becomes the goal, to get on the show and to hopefully make it to the finals, and hope that you'll get a recording contract out of it. But there are many, many stories that people may not even be aware of. Just a few years ago, one of the runners-up for American Idol was put in a Broadway show because she had that name recognition. But it turned out that she didn't have the stamina of doing 8 shows a week. She didn't know what it entailed to be in a Broadway show. And it's not just showing up at the theater, it's an entire life of discipline. And I think that that's another aspect with some artists that are, wondering why their careers are not going down the path that they thought it would be, because they don't necessarily have the self-discipline that it takes to do what it takes in this business.
I think that's right. And I think that's why the artists that I actually interviewed had these incredible qualities of character that I saw, because they're the ones, I didn't interview the ones who dropped out. I didn't interview those who stopped being artists. I'm the ones who stuck with it. And it's a very tough filter to get through. So if you get through it, but also to pick up on what you were saying about American Idol, I mean, there's another thing that the internet has done to the way we think about art and the way artists, is this idea that it's like winning, it's like instant fame, and all we hear about are the winners, and we don't hear about, and I talk about this in that lifestyle chapter, there's that moment pretty early where reality punches you in the face. Like that's the right after college, or if you didn't go to college, like early 20s or whatever, you show up in New York, you show up in LA, you have these big dreams. You're a filmmaker who thinks he's going to win Sundance by age 25. That's what a filmmaker literally said to me. And then reality punches you in the face. And that's the point where you got to say, am I going to commit myself to this? You see the hard road stretching out in front of you. And that's when you find out how much this means to you.
Now, you say that you purposely did not write about or focus on any of those that did drop out. Was that a conscious choice that you made?
The truth is I did try to find a few people, and I contacted one writer in particular, and she never wrote back to me because I think she just really didn't want to talk about it. I think if I'd been able to take even more time with the book than I had, maybe I would have tried to find somebody. They're harder to find, right? It's really hard to find, people who aren't in it anymore.
But there are a lot of reasons. I mean, sometimes people want to settle down and have a family. Sometimes they realize going into this, people want instant fame. And this is, you even say in the book that, if you are, if that's the goal, it's not a very good goal to have.
It's not a good goal to have.
I'm paraphrasing you. But we, and I know so many people who do that. I also have dabbled in PR for a few artists. And a couple of years ago, I asked, I was hired to do the PR. And I said, let's talk about what your goals are with why you're hiring me. And she's, well, I want to get all the cabaret awards. And that was her first goal. And then I said, I don't think I'm the right person for you.
Good for you.
I'm not an awards-driven person. And I don't say, I've got the awards, but that's not what it's about. For me, and one of the other things that I love about this business is the process. I love the possibility that, things will not necessarily turn out. My grandmother used to say, and a friend of mine says, rejection is God's protection. It may not be the path that you want to go down. So with everything that you have brought to the table with this, do you see any other path of this all turning around and the artist gaining control of this thing called the internet?
It's tough. It's going to be really tough. And I don't think there's anything that any individual artist can do. I talked before about how ultimately the problem is the tech companies, the tech monopolies. But the good news, and there hasn't really been a lot of good news about this, certainly during the pandemic, the good news is that the Justice Department just filed an antitrust suit against Google. Mm-hmm. The House Democrats just issued a long report about all four of the big, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Google. It seems like momentum is building to try to bring these companies into some kind of balance with the rest of us, because they're just eating us alive. So I'm hoping that down the road it's not going to happen fast.
So what's next for you? I mean, do you have a follow-up book in mind, or are you even thinking about that at this point?
I am actually giving myself permission not to think about it at this point. This book has been really intense. I really got going on it about 4 years ago. It was full-time because it was such a big project. So I'm looking forward to the election being over. Maybe we'll be able to calm down, and maybe I'll be able to.
From your mouth to God's ears.
That's right.
I want to ask you, I mean, I know that you were and are a critic. Did you yourself have any aspirations to be on the other side of the footlights?
Well, not as a dancer, certainly. I was not going to do that. I was not capable of that. I didn't have the equipment. Like every sort of.
I have to say that doesn't stop some people.
Well, yes, I agree. I took classes as an amateur at the Merce Cunningham studio in Westbeth. It was like a backstage pass to Olympus. I mean, the company members who taught that class were like, deities. So I wasn't going to be that or anything close to that. But I was, a sad young literary man, to quote the title of a novel. And I imagined that I would write novels someday. And I never really tried very hard, but I realized later, getting to know some novelists, that I just don't have the brain for it. People who write novels or plays, they constantly have stories running through their head. They're great at telling stories. They're great at remembering stories. They constantly have stories running through their head. And once I realized that, I'm like, that's not me. I'm a different kind of writer. I deal with ideas more than with stories. And you know what? That's okay too.
Now, as I said earlier, writing a book, it is an art. But do you have any other artistic bents beyond writing?
I don't. My creative outlet is my vegetable garden.
Well, that's an art.
That's something. It's something.
If you can grow a nice beefsteak tomato, you've got something going for you.
It's very gratifying.
And what did you learn about yourself writing this book?
Wow. Well, certainly what I already said, that I had my own preconceptions that I really needed to examine. I think, well, I'm not really answering your question because I kind of knew this already, but I knew that what would enable me to write the book and what I would enjoy the most about writing the book was having those conversations. Because being a teacher, and I was a teacher for a long time, taught me to listen. It taught me to listen to people. People think that being a teacher, there's the stereotype of the college professor who stands up in front of a lecture hall and lectures. That's not what being a teacher is. It's not talking, it's listening. And I was happy to be able to take those listening skills and the pleasure I get from listening into the interviews that I did.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. I hope it was worth your while. There are thousands of places you could have been tonight, but you chose to be here, so I appreciate it. Before we end, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I hope that you will read the book. I think it's a very important read, especially nowadays. I want to make sure it's on camera here. I will even put, let's see here. We'll put there so that people can see the book. And, please do get this book. I encourage every artistic friend that I have to read the book. I was excited when you said yes to me after I first became aware of the book and threw myself into it. Not only did I read the book, but I also listened to the audio version.
Wow.
Because I wanted to hear your words coming through with this. And just incredible. It's an amazing piece of art that's here. I always, if you enjoyed tonight's show, and I hope you did, and if you haven't done so already, please go to my guest book at richardskipper.com and sign the book with your thoughts about the show tonight. That helps to boost me in other markets. I also encourage everyone to go to your Facebook friends list, go to the second name that pops up and order this book for yourself and for your friend. And let's get the book out there on a wider scale. And I hope that, we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Before
this is really meaningful to me.
I always want to give you the final word. So anything you want to say, either about the book, about what's going on in the world right now, any message that you want to get out, you've got the stage. It's all yours. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has really been meaningful to me. I've done a lot of these interviews, but this is really your sort of really lived inside understanding. I mean, way more than me of what this takes. It's been a different kind of conversation. I just want to say that I didn't write this book to discourage anyone from either trying to be an artist or continuing to be an artist. I would say to any young person who wants to be an artist and is unsure, I would say, give yourself that shot. You'll regret it if you don't. Just go in with eyes open. And that's what the book is trying to do. It's just trying to open people's eyes.
Thank you, Bill. Have a great night. Make it a better tomorrow.
Thank you so much.